I am Eleanor Grace Whitmore, 68 years of age, and for almost 50 years I served as a spouse, a parent, and the silent foundation of Hazelbrook Orchards, a modest organic apple farm situated in Pennsylvania's gentle hills. My fingers, now rigid from arthritis, can still recall each phase of transforming flour into sourdough bread and trimming branches at sunrise alongside Richard, my spouse. 3 weeks have passed since I laid Richard to rest. Richard and I wed in 1981, constructing everything side by side, this farm, this dwelling, this family. Yet the morning following his memorial service, I discovered that perhaps I hadn't created what I believed I had, or perhaps it simply wasn't sufficient to maintain. My husband passed away from pancreatic cancer after 14 months of witnessing a man of nature deteriorate, his vitality taken piece by piece. He preferred our children remain unaware, wanting them to continue living without this burden. He murmured to me one evening, his words heavy with medication. Because of my love for him, I consented. However, truthfully, I already understood that our offspring, Darren and Samantha, had become estranged well before the medical diagnosis. Darren, our firstborn, had established a demanding career in Boston's finance sector and hadn't returned home for more than several weekends across 10 years. Samantha, conversely, drifted between unsuccessful wellness ventures, consistently supported by Richard's funds and perpetually requiring another advance. I had wished that sorrow would draw them back to our essence, that they would recall the farm, the family meals, the affection that constructed this dwelling. When they came for the memorial, I didn't observe children grieving their father. I witnessed professionals assessing an inheritance. The evening after the service, I sat by myself in the kitchen, gazing at our dining table's weathered wood. I suggested we could examine Richard's belongings together the following day, a modest offer, a mother's method of creating room for remembrance. They had different intentions. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the lace curtains Richard and I had selected 30 years prior. I prepared coffee, the basic type Richard preferred, not the specialty blend Darren had transported from Boston, and waited at the kitchen table. They descended dressed formally, Darren in a jacket he didn't remove, Samantha in silk and perfectly styled hair. They appeared ready for corporate negotiations, not family remembrance. "Mother," Darren started, setting down his mug with practiced efficiency I'd witnessed in his father, "we've had discussions." Samantha looked between him and me. "We believe it's appropriate to begin organizing matters, the inheritance, the enterprise, the property." I blinked, uncertain I'd heard correctly. "Organizing. It's logical," Darren stated. "You cannot manage the farm independently, and this house is enormous. Mother, excessive for someone of your years." Of my years. The phrase hung heavily in the space. I had tended those trees beside Richard through storms and scorching heat. I had managed finances when we couldn't employ help, prepared desserts for charity events, operated machinery, transported produce to food pantries. "We desire your comfort," Samantha added, her tone smooth like a presentation. "There's an excellent retirement facility 2 hours south Sunnyvale Estates. Activities, companions of your generation." I rose to collect the morning dishes, requiring movement to conceal my trembling hands. Then Darren produced a folder. "Father discussed this with me previously," he said, sliding documents toward me. "He wished for Melissa and me to assume control." I examined the papers printed on Darren's business letterhead. Richard's signature appeared steady, too flawless, it seemed incorrect. He hadn't written that clearly in months, not since the medication began. "This isn't from our family attorney," I observed. "He was clear-headed when he signed it," Darren maintained. "He desired this," Samantha said quickly. "A new beginning. There's a developer interested. $7 million for the property. We'd all be secure, you'd be looked after. A developer. They intended to sell the farm, demolish it, replace generations of harvests and environmental stewardship with pavement and subdivisions." "You're discussing selling your father's life's achievement," I said softly. "Mother, be practical," Darren replied. "The farm cannot continue indefinitely." I felt something awaken within me, a slow-burning anger I hadn't experienced since I once drove away a fox attempting to reach the chicken enclosure. I regarded both of them my children, and said with calm determination, "Present me with the will." Darren hesitated, then pushed it forward again. I didn't touch it. I'm retiring for the evening, I declared. We'll discuss this tomorrow. Deep down, I already understood there would be no tomorrow's conversation. They weren't mourning. They were implementing a strategy. I didn't rest that night. I remained awake in the bed Richard and I had shared for decades, listening to the farmhouse's settling sounds and wind rustling the apple trees outside. Every noise was familiar. It was the silence in my children's hearts that had become alien. By morning, coffee's aroma filled the house, not the warm, comforting variety, but sharp, bitter, imported Darren's preference. I moved deliberately, my joints aching more from treachery than age. When I came downstairs, they were already prepared, coats on, luggage packed. The suitcase wasn't mine. We gathered some necessities for you, Samantha said cheerfully. We thought we could transport you to Sunnyvale today, just to visit. You needn't decide immediately. I'm not relocating to a retirement facility, I stated, pouring myself coffee. Darren consulted his timepiece. Mother, be reasonable. The documentation is complete. We finalize with the developers next week. You cannot remain here. I've resided here my entire adult existence, I responded, voice steady. This is my residence. It belongs to all of us, Darren said flatly. Father bequeathed the business to us. It's time you released it. I studied him, and for the first time truly perceived him, not as the boy who once accompanied Richard through the orchards inquiring about bees and frost, but as a stranger, a man who viewed me as a burden to be handled. I require my medication, I said, stepping away, and I'd like to collect some family photographs. Samantha nodded, visibly relieved. Take whatever personal belongings you want. We'll ship the remainder. Upstairs, I didn't weep. I gathered my pills, but also something they didn't know existed, behind a panel in the medicine cabinet, installed in the 1980s when Richard worried about intruders. I retrieved my passport and birth certificate. In the closet, I reached behind his old flannel shirts and pulled out a small fireproof container. It was heavy, holding something more valuable than sentiment, a deed. The original deed to 20 acres of land purchased under my maiden name before marriage, land with water rights, land essential to any future development. When I returned downstairs, my purse was weightier but my spirit lighter. Prepared? Darren asked. Certainly, I said, allowing Samantha to take my arm. I let them believe I was defeated. We drove past the fields beginning to blossom, past the elementary school where I volunteered, past the library where I read to children. But instead of taking the highway towards Sunnyvale, Darren turned onto a remote county road. 20 minutes later, he stopped on a gravel shoulder beside an empty field. This is your destination, Mother, he said as casually as announcing a traffic light. The house and business belong to us now. Samantha's smile wavered. Darren, what? She'll challenge the will, create scenes. This is cleaner. She has clothes, her medication. There's a gas station 5 miles ahead. He opened my door, and just like that, they departed, leaving me standing roadside with nothing. Or so they believed. The vehicle vanished down the road, leaving dust clouds and the scent of betrayal. I stood motionless, wind tugging my coat, clutching the small suitcase they had prepared for me. I wasn't frightened. I wasn't shattered. I was liberated. I began walking, not toward the gas station Darren had so generously mentioned, but toward town, toward my next action. My shoes weren't designed for gravel roads, and the early spring sun was already warming my neck, but with each step my resolve strengthened. In my purse was everything I needed: my identification, my passport, my medication, and most crucially, the original deed to 20 acres of prime orchard land that Darren and Samantha didn't know existed, land I had purchased under my own name before Richard and I wed. It was a precaution then, just in case the business didn't survive. Richard had called it our just-in-case safety net. Now it was my lifeline. Those 20 acres weren't ordinary land. They contained the only natural water source on the entire property. Without it, no irrigation. Without irrigation, no orchard and no development. My children thought they had trapped me, but they didn't comprehend the soil beneath their feet. They didn't understand the weight of legacy. I did. After nearly 2 hours of walking, my feet were blistered and sore, but I reached Hazelbrook's edge and the familiar sight of Miller's Gas and Grocery. It was small, traditional, and unchanged, a place where people still addressed each other by name and paid with cash. I sat on the outside bench and observed the vehicles coming and going. I didn't appear remarkable, just a weary elderly woman with a suitcase, but I possessed something far more powerful than they ever would, the truth. Ray Miller emerged from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. He'd known me for over 30 years. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his brow creasing. "You all right? You appear a bit pale." "Just resting, Ray." "It's been a lengthy day," I said. He noticed the suitcase beside me, then looked back at me with concern. "Truly sorry about Richard. He was a good man." "Yes," I nodded. "Yes, he was." He hesitated, then asked gently, "You need to use the telephone? If it's not too much trouble." He led me inside, past shelves of canned peaches and discounted cereal to a small back office. I dialed the number from memory, our family attorney, Harold Jennings. "Naomi," he answered on the first ring, surprised. "I've been attempting to reach you. I expected you at the will reading." My grip tightened on the receiver. "What reading?" There was a pause. Darren presented a will. I had concerns. It didn't match the file your husband and I updated last year. "I need your assistance," I said, my voice clear, "and your discretion." "You have both." "My office, 1 hour." I hung up and turned to Ray. "Do you sell prepaid phones?" He nodded. "A few." "Want one?" "Yes, and a bottle of water." He refused my money. "On the house, Mrs. Whitmore. You need anything else, you just say the word." His kindness nearly overwhelmed me, but I didn't cry. When I buried Richard, I didn't cry, and I wouldn't cry now. I had work to do, and I wasn't finished yet. Harold Jennings' office was on the second floor of an old Victorian house on Main Street, just across from the town library. He'd been our attorney for over 30 years. Harold was the type of man who wore sweater vests without irony and still believed in handshakes. His secretary, Helen, gasped softly when she saw me. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Jennings is expecting you. Would you like water? Coffee?" "I'm fine, thank you," I said. Harold met me at his office door. He hadn't aged much since Richard's last visit, just slightly more stooped perhaps, but his eyes were sharp, alert. "Naomi," he said, leading me not to the desk, but to a pair of leather chairs beside the window. He sat across from me, his expression serious. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the funeral, the fraudulent will, the boardroom-like discussion in our kitchen, the drive, the roadside abandonment, every detail. He didn't interrupt, just listened, occasionally nodding, his face growing darker by the minute. When I finished, I reached into my purse and removed the fireproof box. From it, I pulled the original deed to the 20 acres, the land Richard and I had quietly set aside decades ago in my name. Harold examined the document with reverent silence. "This is gold, Naomi. This isn't just land, this is leverage. With the water rights and the zoning, the developer cannot touch anything without this." "I know." He leaned back, tapping the deed's edge thoughtfully. "The will Darren submitted, it's a forgery. I had my suspicions when I saw the signature. It was too clean, too smooth for a man under hospice care. I knew it wasn't Richard's handwriting." "Well, challenge it," Harold said. "But that takes time. Meanwhile, we use this." He held up the deed. "You still have legal ownership of the most critical piece of the land. They cannot move forward with the sale without your consent." "I want my home back," I said quietly, "and I want them to understand what they've done." Harold nodded. "Then we'll make them understand. First, I'll draft a letter to the developer. They need to be made aware that the property is not what they were promised. Will they back out? If they're smart, they will. Developers don't like lawsuits, and they certainly don't like incomplete land rights." He stood suddenly, purposeful. "I also know a judge in district court. We can get a motion filed to freeze the sale until the matter is resolved." I looked out the window across the street where a young couple was walking hand in hand, unaware of the quiet storm beginning in this small office. "I don't want revenge, Harold," I said, more to myself than to him. "I want truth and peace." "You'll have both," he promised. "Starting now." By noon the next day, Harold had filed an emergency injunction to freeze any transfer of ownership related to Hazelbrook Orchards. A courier delivered the legal notice to the development firm Darren and Samantha had been dealing with. Within hours, the deal was suspended. The developer, faced with unexpected legal complications and the revelation that a key portion of the land containing the only natural water source was owned separately and undisclosed, began to backpedal. Their attorneys reached out to Harold with urgent requests for clarification. "I told them the truth," Harold said as we sat in his office reviewing documents. "The land is incomplete, the water rights are not transferable, and more importantly, your children do not have the authority they claim." That evening I received a text message from Samantha, the first time she'd reached out since they left me on the roadside. "Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Darren's freaking out. We didn't know about that other land. Can we just fix this? Fix this." I stared at the words on my prepaid phone. There was no apology, no recognition of what they'd done, just panic now that the money was slipping through their fingers. I didn't reply. Later that night, Darren called Harold directly, demanding explanations, trying to reassert control. But Harold calmly informed him that all matters would now go through legal channels. "They're realizing," Harold said, "that they miscalculated badly. They thought I had nothing left," I replied, "but I had everything they forgot to value." He looked at me with quiet pride. "You're handling this with grace, Eleanor. A lot of people would have gone straight to scorched earth. I've lived too long with kindness in my bones to become bitter now," I said. "But I won't be silent either." Outside, the town of Hazelbrook moved on with its day. Kids riding bikes, a dog barking in the distance, someone mowing their lawn. Life was still simple here, still honest, and I intended to keep it that way. The land would not be sold. Not now, not like this. The orchard Richard built, the legacy he left, was not a commodity. It was home, and I wasn't done protecting it. In the weeks that followed, I didn't return to the old farmhouse. I rented a modest apartment above the bakery on Hazelbrook's Main Street. It had a small balcony, just big enough for a rocking chair and a few potted herbs. The place smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread in the mornings. It wasn't the home Richard and I built, but it was mine, and that mattered. I started teaching again, quilting on Wednesday nights at the community center, just like before. I even began holding weekend workshops at the library, sharing what I knew about organic gardening and sustainable fruit farming. Teenagers came, retirees came, even young couples hoping to start their own farms. People listened, not because I raised my voice, but because I spoke with history in my hands, the land we protected for decades. I donated the water rights in a trust to the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative, a local initiative that supports young farmers. They'd use it, not sell it. They'd care for the trees like Richard had. That was the future I wanted. Darren and Samantha kept their distance. I heard whispers that the developer pulled out entirely, that the fake will had been formally challenged and frozen, that their reputations had taken a hit in their respective cities. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need revenge to be allowed to be real. I chose peace, but not at the cost of truth. The orchard remained untouched, blooming as always in spring. And every time I passed by it on my walks, I smiled, not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of a woman who had reclaimed not just her land, but her voice. They had underestimated me, but I had finally remembered who I was. I often think back to that moment on the gravel road, standing alone with a suitcase I didn't pack, watching my own children drive away without a second glance. It should have broken me, but it didn't, because in that silence, I finally heard the truth I had ignored for years. Love is not loyalty without question, and being a mother does not mean tolerating betrayal just because you raised the ones who betrayed you. Darren and Samantha believed they could erase me, that because I was older, grieving, alone, I wouldn't fight back, that I had no choice but to hand over everything. But they forgot something. Before I was a wife, a mother, a widow, I was Eleanor Grace, a woman who built something with her hands, her heart, and her mind. And I had never needed to scream to be strong. What they saw as weakness, my silence, my trust, my love, was actually the very power that protected me. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been cast aside, underestimated, or treated like a footnote in your own life, I want you to hear this. Your strength isn't in how loud you fight. It's in how well you know what you stand for. And when you stand your ground, even quietly, it echoes louder than any betrayal. My orchard still stands. My name is still on the deed. And my life, it's mine again. So to anyone who's ever been told this is where you get off, I say, walk if you must, but don't leave your worth behind. Walk with purpose, walk with quiet power, and when you're ready, tell your story. It might just save someone else. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. And if you've ever been underestimated and found your strength, tell us. Your story matters.